day, grade 12 learners, and welcome to today's English home language lesson. My name is Bash Suchit, and this lesson is proudly brought to you by the Gauteng Department of Education in collaboration with the Saibono Discovery Center. So, thanks for joining us again this week. We are busy with English in terms of the preparation for your formal assessments as well as informal assessments during classwork time. But today I'm going to focus on the 45-55 strategy with regards to English home language paper 1. Now, why I'm doing this particular lesson, grade 12, is because you are going to be, anytime from this week into next week, writing your test for the term 1, your control test. And it would take on either the 70 mark allocation or depending on what your educator is assessing in terms of the ATP for term 1. So it could be a reduced amount of marks, but the content will still be the same. All right, so we are going to focus on some hints and tips to allow you to get, again, the maximum marks for this test in term 1. So it's the first time you're going to see how this grade 12 exam is going to look like in the future as well. So please take note of what is expected of you during the year. I did do the summary last week, and today we'll do this entire look at the paper and what's happening with it, and then we'll move on to a little bit more of questions in terms of the tests for the following 2 weeks. Right, so let's look at your paper 1. Now, you would know that in paper 1, we need to ensure that we get at least, so if we're that learner who is struggling with the language, in other words, we can't communicate effectively in written work, for example, or even sometimes in communication in the oral, for example, right? So maybe we are that learner that cannot write down what we are thinking in a flowing sentence with all of the various parts of the sentence that needs to be there. Then I'm saying to you, please ensure that you get the minimum, that is 28 out of 70 for this test or this exam paper, right? Now, if you are that candidate who's doing very well, you're getting your 60% and above for the subject, then obviously you don't need to focus too much on the 28 marks, but you're working to move that 30 odd or 40%, 40 out of 70 up to at least 50 or 60 out of 70 for the paper. All right, so what we're saying is if you can secure at least 6 marks in the summary, and you can basically get 10 marks in the comprehension, 5 marks each in question 3 and 4, as well as 2 marks in question 5, then you would be passing this paper at the bare minimum. But we do not want you there. We want you in the 50-60% region for this paper. All right, and hopefully you've been paying attention to educators at school level who are teaching you the language structures and the conventions that are needed to maximize the mark in paper 1. Right, so let's look at what happened during the course of 2024 and the years before that, in terms of the last 2 years before last year, where mistakes happened with the candidates who were doing or writing the paper. So with regards to the comprehension, we found that many of the learners are and were struggling to get the gist of the comprehension passage. So remember, when you're going through the skimming and scanning process when reading a text, you need to get the gist, the main idea of what that text is talking about. And that then would be needed to link to the title. So the reason why the writer is writing that information would be contained in the comprehension, and his main idea about that topic will be contained in the text as well. So that inability to understand it came out very clearly in the responses that the candidates were giving last year and the year before that. There's also this problem where there's not coherency in the responses. So when you have to put chunks of information into your own words, you are struggling with that. So you need to start practicing, please. When you're watching TV, for example, or playing a video game that you're seeing certain important information in those things, take note of it and start to put the ideas down on a piece of paper. There's also this thing where many of the learners are doing this journaling, as they would say. So you're putting down your ideas about your life on a daily basis on an A4 piece of paper and into your diary, for example, right? That kind of thing is where you're summarizing the important parts of your day or your life thus far. So make sure that you can formulate a coherent response to a question that is asked of you if you had to summarize something like that, right? Then the majority of the learners could not write answers that required critical thinking. Now, what that essentially means, grade 12s, is that you're reading information and you're getting a very general or a very basic level of understanding. We need you to move from the basic to the more intricate way of analyzing what has been said. So take it from the literal sense, move it to the figurative sense of what this writer is talking about. All right? Look at words that were maybe very simple in the way it is, like look for your synonym for that word, or look for an antonym for that word, or look for your homonym or your homophone in that instance. So start looking at those things, all right? Then take what you have read or what you've learned so far and try and understand how it's impacted you as an individual thus far. So if you are being impacted on a positive side of things or a negative side of things, it means you've learned something that's affected you either negatively or positively. And that's where the critical analysis is coming into play, where you are taking what you've learned, you're decoding it, you're diagnosing what it's saying, and you're then giving us a response based on that. So that higher order thinking is where the problem is coming through with regards to the responses. Right, so make sure you construct your response very clearly. Then with regards to the summary, here we saw in the last week's lesson as well, I spoke about huge chunks just being lifted, okay? And again, it's just coming out in terms of the paragraph where we're putting in interlinking words and we're giving that. Yes, that's fine if we're struggling and things like that. But remember, you want to show us that you understand what you have read. So the quick wins is, yes, to just get the 7 out of 10 by just quoting text. But it's not you learning or showcasing to us that you've learned the skill of summarizing. So candidates still had the tendency of producing the point form summary. I spoke to you about this last week again, but please move away from that. We need you to have a paragraph with interlinking words used and making sure that you're giving us the 7 most important points in relation to the question that has been asked. So you pay attention to the instructions. And the third one here was the number of words became an issue or is an issue currently, where the summary is either too short or it's too long in the word count. So be aware of that. Yes, you may get away with the fact that you are able to summarize the 7 points in a fewer number of words, but you can't say to me that you can summarize 200 or 250 words or sometimes 300 words into a paragraph of 20 words. That's not possible, all right? So be aware that you get as close as possible to that 80 to 90 words that is required of you. And then don't exceed it to a point where you're just copying everything down and it's going in excess of 150 words. Definitely going to be penalized with regards to that, right? Then we're looking at the advert. Now we're moving to section C of the paper. This 10-mark question, again, had many people, candidates, lifting responses or pieces of information for the responses and their answers. So again, there's no link between the visual and the text that is being clarified by the candidates. Also, when you're identifying a tone, for example, that is asked of you, the explanation doesn't always link to the tone that you have mentioned. So be careful. When you're using a word, a tone word that you would say, make sure it is actually explained clearly in your response as well. All right? Same thing happening with the mood and the atmosphere there. So whereas we had the issue where there's total mismatch, the other problem came in where when there is that identification that is coming through, there is still that in-depth analysis not coming in. All right, so you need to show us that you understand the reason why this writer used that particular tone, or why his attitude to the topic was this way or that way. That's where we want you to go with your responses, please. All right, so remember to link what you are learning. Then with regards to the cartoon, now here we will do this revision lessons again in the next 2 to 3 weeks. But just for you to take note of is the fact that learners again had the problem with the tone identification in the cartoon. There was also poor interpretation of questions. So remember, visual literacy in terms of adverts will have certain aspects that you need to focus on, like your body copy, your target audience, your hyperboles maybe is used there, or the pun is used, or the satire is used there, okay, or the other Ada principle that's used there. Whereas in the cartoons, there is a similarity, but you've got facial features versus body language, all right, versus the fact that there's various techniques used here in the cartoons. Can you see what a single frame is as opposed to a series of frames, okay? There's a reason for that. Can you pick up where there's an ellipsis used? Why is it there? All of those things is where we want you to focus in terms of the cartoons. Look at the terminology that is needed for you to master understanding of cartoons. Examples: stereotype, satire, caricature. That must be clearly understood by you. Also, candidates had the problem where they ignored the fact that they had to refer to both the visual and the verbal. Now, that is also the problem we saw in the advert. So make sure that you look at the image or the text holistically at all aspects within that text when you are trying to give us a response. So the last frame in the cartoon usually has the punchline or the most important information that we want you to get from the other series of frames that were showcasing information. So make sure that is there, okay? You interpret these frames very, very clearly. Good. Then let's look at the quick wins for you in terms of now when you have the paper and maybe you're struggling. How do you secure that you get the minimum marks for the questions, all right? Or if you want to get that A symbol or that B symbol, then you need to sharpen up these aspects as well so you don't lose marks unnecessarily for silly mistakes. Okay, so what do you need to do? Firstly, you've got to take the 15 minutes reading time very, very keep it very close to your heart, okay? Because in the exam, you'll get 10 minutes. And now sometimes if you have an accommodation granted, for example, then you'd have more time. But if you're the candidate who is just writing for the 2 hours, or in this case, for the 70 marks, or you're writing for the hour and a half if it's a 40-mark test, then you need to spend that 10 to 15 minutes reading. And when you are reading, you've got to read the text the first time and then reread the text. Because at the second reading, you're going to highlight the important information that's in the text. You're going to highlight the topic sentence, for example, of each paragraph. Because remember, around that topic sentence, the other information is built around that, okay? Then the 45 minutes is important because here I want to say to you that you're going to be spending time, 45 minutes, to answer the questions in the comprehension. All right, so that is your target of the time allocation. All right, then look at that question mark for 1.11 or 1.12, the last question. Remember, this used to be 4 marks. It's now brought down to 3 marks, okay? But in essence, the text or the question is still asking the same information of the text, like you've seen in the previous exam papers. So remember, it's a comparison question between text A and text B. So sometimes you may be asked to look at a particular paragraph in text A in relation to text B. you need to obviously look for the important information that the question is asking of you and compare what the two texts are saying about that particular issue. Okay? Then, when you are reading the text, read the passage quickly. The title is important because the title is giving us a clue of what is going to be spoken about in the text. And on our second reading or our third reading, dependent again, if you're a fast reader, you can do three readings. If you're a slower or a medium paced reader, you would at least get two of the readings done of the text. So when you're doing that, read through the comprehension questions. And at that point, you are going to now make note of the key words, the question word in that particular question that is asking me to give certain information in my response. So be aware of those question words because they will dictate what kind of answer we are expecting from you in that response. All right, so bear that in mind. Further on, identify the purpose. Remember, I said to you this from the beginning of these sessions, that you are communicating either on the oral format or in the the written format. But what is important is that you have an idea of what you want to say to the audience. And therefore, you want to get that information through in the correct way. So just like you are doing that, so is the writer of the text. So identify his purpose. Why did he write about this topic? What was his viewpoint on the topic? Why, for example, where was he going with this train of thought? How did that train of thought affect you as a reader? These are the questions you need to start asking yourself when you are reading the comprehension. The instructions are there for a reason, grade 12s. Ensure they are read and understood because they guide you on what the examiner is expecting of you. Focus on the keywords in the comprehension passage, okay? Because that is, again, important information. Read the questions. Decide from there at which level is my response going to head toward. Is it now based on an entry level, a very simple response needed maybe, or is it maybe asking of me a little bit more of an analysis or an explanation or a comment? Then that would obviously move to the higher order of questioning. Then your level 1 and level 2 questions, your entry level ones, they are straightforward responses that we require of you. So here we're saying, can you simply rephrase the information given to you? Can you reorganize the ideas given to you and then offer a viewpoint on that in your own words? So when we're talking about rephrasing the sentences, we are saying to you to master that skill, pick up the newspaper. If you don't have access to the newspaper, go online to an e-reading platform, okay? Read a text. And when you have done that, you will now be able to then say, what is this text all about? And rephrase the ideas in your own words. And that's a skill that would help you in both the summary and the comprehension. All right, so that's just some of your quick wins for the comprehension. Also make sure that you take note of the mark allocation because that is a guide. It shows you if it's two marks, then I'm requiring of you 2 separate ideas. If it's a 3-marker question, for example, I'm saying to you, give me your discussion, show me the evidence, and then comment on why this is relevant or not, for example. Okay, again, depending on the question words that's being used. Get that outlined information, the general picture of what this text is all about. And then what I notice with many of the candidates and myself is I like to imagine what the writer is talking about. So if you are that visual candidate that can imagine the images of what he's talking about, then go ahead and do that, all right? But again, don't go into a dreamland mode and forget that you have to give us a response for questions. So it will help you to focus on the content, but don't spend too much of time imagining what he or she is talking about. So, what is my practical advice to you for the comprehension? It is to please take note of the question word firstly. Underline that question word. So, for example, let's say they say list the certain information in line 5, or they say explain this figure of speech or explain the part of speech in this particular sentence. You need to be able to know what those words are asking of you. There will be a key word or a key idea in that question that is asked of you. Please circle that. Try to remember at which point you saw that kind of information being showcased to you. So when it says to you refer to paragraph 2 or refer to paragraph 3, it means exactly that. Either the information is contained in that paragraph or the information contained in that paragraph is a build up to a response that we want from you. So it's leading you into a particular frame of thought to deliver a response. Okay, so remember where you might have read the fact that is being mentioned there, either in the middle, the beginning, or the end. Put your eyes into what we call the search mode, and that is to look from the middle downward in each paragraph for important information. It's usually where the chunk is found in that paragraph. So read the whole sentence and try and get a complete meaning of what is being said in context. In other words, in relation to the topic that we are speaking about. Then, with regards to the summary, remember, I spoke about this last week and I'm going to mention again today. It is about taking huge chunks of information and putting it into a smaller quantity, okay? Or we want to get to that gist, the most important information about that topic. So we want the key ideas from you, we want the main points from you, we want the gist of what that text is about. So it is points that is worth taking note of. That is what you're looking for in this summary, testing of the summary. So you need to firstly read the text I said to you to get that general feeling, like the comprehension. Do the second reading where you're now going to highlight the important information. And at this point, you can also then see what is not relevant in the paragraph. Please make sure at this point, grade 12s, that you are accurate in the response that you're giving. Be clear, be straightforward, keep it short, keep it simple. Don't put in more words than you have to get an idea across, right? Your examiner or your marker is not going to be there to see if you can give me a creative response that's going to over-exaggerate certain things. That's not what this language paper is testing. We are testing your ability to understand the language structures in the context that it is being asked of in the text. So please make sure that you give us your own responses, your own words in your answers as far as possible, but maintain the idea that the text is speaking about. Use the interlinking words as I mentioned before, like further, more, or therefore, and bring your ideas into the paragraph, and remember they must flow from one idea to the next idea. Use full sentences. We are not testing a point form summary, so you should not have incomplete ideas. We want complete ideas coming through. Please remove things like stats or examples that is not necessary for the summary. We don't want to have direct speech, for example, being quoted. It's not really relevant in the summary, all right? So please take note of these hints. Okay, so firstly, delete descriptions, examples, elaborations. Replace the jargon, in other words, the technical term used in that field of study. Remove that and put in your own words. But when doing that, ensure you're keeping the main idea and you've given us a list of key concepts that that particular text is talking about in relation to the topic. And then make sure you've got at least 7 points. But if you've got 8 or 9 points, all the better, because then maybe if one is not too clear, the other two would cover up for that lacking of that point that's not clear. So again, here I'm saying, if you're that learner who is struggling and you can't put things into your own words, then I'd say to you, quote the 7 points and then know that either of those points are incorrect, you won't be credited for it. But if they are all correct, you'll get your 7 out of 10 without a language mark being given for quoting. All right, cool. Now let's go on a little bit further with regards to section C. With your advertisements, remember we're testing this advert and its holistic understanding. So you're looking at every single aspect in terms of layout, format, the design that is there. You're looking at is there perhaps an important person that is used in this particular advert? Is there a phrase that will catch my attention? All right, and keep me engaged in the text. These are things that you need to look at when you are scanning for information. Remember, the advert has been known to be a visual text, so it may or may not engage in the terms of where it's only having a written piece or it's only having an image. So it depends again. If you have an image with words, then you got to obviously make sure the link is there. If it's only an image without words, which is not really where we would go with home language, but if you do have that, then there's obviously a way to also dissect that for meaning. So the advertisement is the visual text, which may or may not engage some written text. So this is often a better way of communicating than writing out words. So here it allows us to overcome language barriers that may be found amongst the readers at large. Okay, so there we want to ensure that everybody understands what is being showcased if the image is only there. Right? It's not always about, as I mentioned before, about selling a product. It could be selling a service or showcasing an important event that is about to come into being in your environment. So it's also about creating awareness, generating support for maybe a charity fund. And now when you get these pamphlets, for example, that you're reading through, you're going to have to sift through for information about that particular event or cause that is being mentioned. Right. Then further on, we're looking at, do you understand the concepts of what in the text grabs my attention? Okay. What in the layout or in the text that is being showcased to me allows me to remain interested in what the advertiser is saying or showcasing to me? When they've done that, or while they're doing that, in terms of the layout and the graphics being used, have they now instilled within me a desire to do something? All right? Have they affected me on an emotional level? And if the advertiser has succeeded in affecting you on an emotional level, he will urge you to take action. Either to go and buy something, or to speak about something in a different forum, or maybe just not even take note of something in a particular setup. So there's a reason why that advertiser has advertised that product or that service, and you need to obviously be aware of that. Okay, so AIDA, A is for the attention. This is when you become aware about the product or the brand or the service. The interest part is where we are creating that curiosity within you to read further, to get more information about the text. We're then dealing with the desire now, that impact that this particular advert had on me. Did it make me feel or have a strong desire to move towards something, or to do something or not to do something. And then the action part, the A, is there to say what in there is compelling me to take action. It basically could be maybe the facial features of the advert, the image in the advert. It could be the text that has been used in the advert. What is it that has conjured up this desire for me to go and buy this product, or to obviously be aware of the service, right? And there's the explanation there for you, which you've seen before, hopefully. And if you haven't, then I would advise you to at least take a minute or so, go through it, understand it in terms of what are we looking at for the AIDA principle when we're dealing with advertisements. Right. Then further on to that, let's go a little bit more further in terms of what is important. When we're looking at the attention, you have to ask yourself, what is it that is catching my attention? Is it in the layout? Is it in the structure of the images within the text? Or is it the written text in that particular text? All right. Then, when dealing with the interest aspect, that should be, I like this. I want to be part of this. I maybe do not want to be part of it, okay? So that interest aspect will come in with the fact that you have bought into the idea. You like what has been showcased to you. Then, when it comes to the desire part, you're going to be now feeling as if you want this. You want to go into it. You want to become part of the group of people that are buying into this idea. So you want it, right? And then action, obviously, dealing with the fact that you want to now go out and buy it, and you actually fulfill that task where you go out and buy the product, right? Also within the advert that you're looking at, we are talking about my desire versus my action. So it can go either way. It can go negatively or positively. But in the instance of that, the advertiser will use certain manipulative techniques to get you to buy into a particular aspect of it. So he'll make use of informative language, for example. So the language or the words used in the text will be there to inform me about the product or the service. It would be language that will assist the advertiser to sell the idea or the product. And it will also contain maybe jargon, technical terms that only that particular field of people, people found in that particular field of study would understand. All right. So your target market will be very much clear when you're looking at the informative language there. Right. If he's using emotive language, for example, he is using words in the text to appeal to my emotions. In other words, he's persuading me to believe in a certain idea. So the words there will be fully based on emotional appeal, right? If he's looking at language that is used every day by the common man on the street, for example, then the vocab will be less sophisticated. There'll be simple sentences. There'll be maybe a use of a colloquialism or a slang in this particular text. And that's where your informal language will be tested, the techniques on that. If he now wants to say, I'm dealing with a person or a target audience that is of a higher order of thinking, okay? He's targeting that professional that is delving deeper into certain aspects. Then he will use language that is maybe employing the use of figurative language in terms of the figures of speech. He would captivate that reader's attention. So he'd make use of simile, metaphor, personification, hyperbole, all of that, okay? You'll have aspects of assonance versus alliteration coming into play, paradox, all that would be there, okay? And then he's got the other language technique to use, which is the puns when dealing with the advert. So that's the play on the words. And this he would then use to get us to buy into the idea. a clever sentence made, a statement made, or two would get us into going to go and do something about it. Now, when you're dealing with the adverbs, please go over what a product is, what a service is. Go over the concept of the target audience. Who is the target audience is very important because the content will not be relevant to every single person in the world. There will be a particular reason or a group of people that a writer is targeting. Look at brand versus slogan. All right, this brand is the name of the product or the service. The slogan is the catchphrase, that catchy phrase that would not need anything else for us to understand in terms of the sentence. We just listen to that and we know exactly what they are talking about. All right, then look at the aspects of my interpretation. Am I moving from the literal understanding to the figurative understanding of the advert? Am I using, again, words that are showing that as an intended audience, I have understood what the advertiser is speaking about? Have I been able to evaluate? In other words, how effective was this image or the words used in that text in terms of giving me a particular meaning of what's being said? Do I agree with that, what the advertiser is talking about with relation to that product or that service? Okay. Am I able to also describe the visual clearly that is contained in the text? And can I find a link of that visual to an everyday situation that I might be facing? Can I find details that would be relevant to what is happening around me, for example? That again will come in with the critical analysis of the text. So you're looking at, firstly, the message, which would then come through with emotive language being used. You're checking for the target audience, in other words, the group of people that this advert was targeting. You're looking at the link between the visual and the verbal. The visual, the image, the verbal, the written words, okay? Then, in terms of the verbal and the visual clues, sorry, I meant the visual clues will be the facial expression, the body language, the gestures that the particular image might be showcasing. Then look at the logo and the slogan, all right? Look at the punctuation marks that would be used in the particular advert, because maybe an exclamation mark would be a statement of something, or it is showing a hurried way of showcasing something, all right, information. Then the figures of speech being showcased to you there, and maybe there was a rhetorical question being used in the text which would elicit a different response from you. All right, then let's look at some questions we could ask ourselves when we analyzing the advert. We can say, what advertising technique is used to persuade me to do something? All right, there's an advertising technique. How was the advertiser using the main image to get his message across? So the main image is usually in the center of that particular advert, okay? Identify and categorize words into persuasive wording and manipulative wording. All right, so your stereotypes versus your sarcasm, your satire, all of those things, irony comes into play. And maybe when we use the character, or the writer has used the character in that advert, what is the testimony that's given by the character? All right, and how does that information affect me when I read the text? Obviously, sometimes if it's someone you like in the real, a celebrity that's showcasing something about the advert, that is the image in the advert, then you would buy into it, okay? But if it's someone that you don't really like as a celebrity and they're talking about a particular product, then you're not so interested in that. So again, that becomes relevant in your understanding. So look at the mix of the images and the print. Look at the mix of the colors. Now, in your instance, grade 12s, during class time, you would be able to see color in terms of red, green, blue, all of the different colors. But in the exam paper or in the exam setup, you will only be getting the gray or the black and white images. A darker gray versus a lighter gray would mean certain things, okay? The white spaces would mean certain things. So you got to go back and look at the notes that ma'am or sir gave to you in class and look at it if you can during your study time. Review that image on a color print and see how it looks different in terms of color versus the black and white, because essentially we'd like you to understand it in terms of color, but we do know with costs that is obviously a very expensive thing to do, so we're leaning to the idea of black and white and the understanding that the darker colors would be showcased in a certain way as opposed to the lighter colors in a certain way. Right, so again, ma'am and sir will explain that to you in class. Look at the setting of the advert. In other words, the background information will come through. Where is this advert set? Around which events perhaps? Look at the camera angle, right? How is the image being portrayed? Is it a top view, a side view? All of those things that would come in, okay? The placement of the objects in terms of the layout as opposed to the text. There will be a link between those two things. Does the characters or the showcased, are they the focal point, or are they towards the smaller type of font, that a smaller type of structure being used? The body language they're showcasing, is it important or relevant? Maybe it's not even relevant at all, right? Look at the size of the images or the print in terms of the words. Is it in bold font, italics font, for example? Is it maybe, eye-catching in terms of calligraphy might be used? All of those things you would know, or a cursive writing, as you know. And then ask yourself, what can I personally take away from this particular advert? Can I relate to this aspect or not in the given setup? Right. Then, remember, you need to understand what the words in the advert mean. So please, when you are showcased a particular instance, a particular image and text in the image of the advert, make sure you're looking at the drawings, the pictures, the words, the background versus the focal point of the text, right? Because that would indicate to you what the message of this particular advert is. Do you identify the logo, the slogan? Have you included understanding of the visual and the verbal techniques, right? Have you paid attention to the punctuation mark that has been used? When you are answering the questions, did you break down the questions in the two parts that is required of you? The analysis of the two parts. Have you highlighted that in your responses? Did you also take note of the mark allocation, where it's a 3-mark versus a 2-mark, where we need the comment about the diction used or the style of the advertiser? All of that would come into that 2 or 3-mark question. So apply your understanding of all language concepts when you are dealing with the advertisement. Then, when dealing with the cartoon analysis, remember the cartoon is a piece of art. And usually we would have the cartoon there to create humor. And it should be the instance why we have cartoons. There will also be serious issues that are made light of through a cartoon strip. All right? And we will focus on that when we are doing our answering techniques. All right? So right now you need to take note of, can you express the ideas that the cartoonist has used to understand what he is saying? Because that draws you in to understand what he's saying, okay? He may have used maybe Garfield versus Madam and Eve, all right? And that kind of image with Tandy might come in as well. Those characters should be well known to you by now, right? Also, a cartoonist will usually showcase a serious current issue or a political issue happening at the time with regards to the various techniques, okay, of creating humor. He will also challenge our understanding of stereotypes. Because remember, the stereotypes are those fixed ideas that you have about a person or a group of people, right? So it also would focus on that exaggerated understanding of it, that preconceived idea. Can you take it and delve into understanding why you hold that particular viewpoint? And can you see that that viewpoint may be flawed, or it may be correct, or it may need to be, modified here and there? And that's where he will challenge those issues when testing the or when looking at the cartoon strip. And when your examiner is examining you, he will look at all of those aspects as well. All right. Can you understand that your ideas about a particular group of people or a person or a nation as a group, can you understand that it's a fixed idea and it needs to also be modified in certain instances? All right. Then, can you notice the difference between the single frame and the one where there's more than one frame, the series of frames? The single frame, like this here on the side of your screen, would be one important frame of information that's there, and it's showcasing everything you need to know in that particular frame. So it's a single frame, giving us as much information as possible. And then you've got this one here, which is the series of frames. So it'll be like this: frame 1, frame 2, and it carries on like that in your exam paper, where the examiner will set that up for you. All right. So when we go a little bit further into analyzing the particular frames, you will notice that there is content in the frame. It's showing the direct speech that is happening between the characters. All right. They are dealing again with concepts, and they're trying to showcase to us also issues that we may be experiencing. Then with regards to the comic strip terminology, let's see if I can maybe expand that a little bit. I hope it's not too blurred. All right. Can you notice panel versus frame versus the title of the particular cartoon strip? Can you give us the focus of what the speech bubble is talking about, the content? Do you note between the difference between the speech bubble and the thought bubble? All right. Can you see that there is a thought bubble, meaning it's the ideas that the person has that they are not talking about in that particular frame? All right. Can you also notice that there would be speed or motion lines? All right. So when there's a hurried movement happening, you would see certain lines being used as opposed to just a one line in the image. All right. So let's go on a little bit further in terms of the cartoon analysis. You are looking for the characters and the setting around which their actions are taking place. You're looking at the words they are using to showcase the humor that we want to get from here, okay? We're looking again at the mark allocation, like that 2 mark or that 3 mark. Remember the split as I spoke to you. Revise words that are used to describe tone. You should have got a list of tone words done by now in grade 12. If you haven't got that, you need to start working with it immediately. Put down words that would showcase the tone of a particular cartoonist, all right, or a writer. Look at the facial expressions, because that is where it's going to describe the character's mood or feelings about a particular topic. If you are not passionate about something, you would be very much dull in your approach. You won't even want to stand up straight or sit up straight. You would be slouching in your positions, all right? They also look at the facial, the body language, all right? That one would show us again Is the person having an open posture or a closed posture? Because that would mean he's really interested in something or he's not interested in what is being said. Look at the font size that is being used in the text. Is it bold? Is it a smaller font in one part of the text as opposed to the other part of the text? Punctuation marks. Did he make use of the ellipsis for a particular idea? Did he make use of the statement, the exclamation mark for the statement? Did he make use of a colon versus a semicolon versus the apostrophe? All of these punctuation marks have functions within sentences, and you need to look at that when we're talking about cartoons, right? Then, here is the important information about the cartoons. Do you recognize that there's a speech bubble that would be looking like that? All right. It's the direct words of the character. Then remember, we can have a spin-off from this where we would say to you, rewrite the sentences, the sentence found in the speech bubble in frame 1 in the indirect speech, for example, or the reported speech. Then you would know, okay, or I'll say to you, refer to frame 5 and give me the reported speech of the character, just as a question, okay? Now you'd need to know, okay, that frame 5 is the direct words of that character. I need to put it into reported speech. Right. Then, do you see the difference between the speech bubble and the thought bubble? Notice these 3 dots here usually is what precedes the actual bubble, which is then that cloud effect, okay? That is the words that are not spoken. It is the ideas that are held with, obviously, in the mind of the character. Then, the jagged edged speech bubble. This is showcasing the emotional response of the character, okay? You've said all these things to me. What should I do? How should I react? What am I supposed to do? All of that will come in with the jagged edged speech bubble. Notice as well, you would have question marks and exclamation marks being used in that instance. It is showcasing the various emotional responses of the character. Okay, then concepts like the following. Irony. Remember, this is just definitions given to you. You're going to take the definition and use it to understand the text. Do you see a strange or a funny or a difficult situation being showcased here in the text? All right, in which things are happening in the opposite way to what you would expect. So you would have an image there in the cartoon and you kind of predicting what would happen. But then the opposite happens. Can you see the irony there? Okay. Can you then notice sarcasm, where there's a saying or writing the opposite of what you mean, or speaking in a way that's intended to make someone else feel stupid or less of a person, or even show them that you feel angry. Okay. So that is where the sarcasm is coming in there. Then the pun, that clever play of the words, which possibly would give us 2 different meanings. Can you see that? Because that would come in for the creation of humor. And then satire, where we're using the humor to criticize somebody or something to make them seem silly. So go over these 4 terms in relation to everything else we spoke about with cartoon analysis, right? Then looking at the visual clues versus the verbal clues. I did mention to you before that the visual, okay, is what you see. So in a cartoon, that would be the body language showcased by the character, his facial expressions being showcased. Is he smiling? Does he have a downturned mouth structure? All right. Is his eyes wide open? Are they closed? Are there maybe tears being showcased from his eyes? All of that would show the visual image, all right? Then the posture of the characters mentioned there, also the drawing itself, that would come in, all right, when we're looking at the visual clues, what you see. Then the verbal clues are the words in the cartoon strip. This is where it's going to include aspects such as rhetorical questions being asked, maybe a repetition of a word or a group of words being used in the other frame and the second frame. All right? Maybe there would be imperatives being used, minor sentences coming across, the tone being showcased, sound devices coming across. All of that will be contained in the understanding of the verbal clues. In other words, the words that have been used. Okay, and then here's a visual representation of the visual clues versus the verbal cues. Can you see in this frame here, frame 1, that the mother is obviously talking about the fact that she warned her son about something. And the father is then like, really? Notice the facial expression. So when we're looking at the body language, the anger will be showcased by the hands on her hips. All right? Her eyes wide open would be the visual that you're looking at. Then, to keep that idea going across, look at the father's posture. He's coming into the frame. He is leaning forward towards the mother's structure, again showing he's interested in what the mom is talking about. Then look at how the words are structured. So it's in a bigger font, the exclamation mark showing that the mother is shouting what she is talking about, shouting about it. Then look at the second frame here, where it says, I told Jeremy that if he wasn't home by 11 on the dot, he would suffer the wrath of Connie Duncan. And again, the exclamation mark there. Notice again that it's all in a capitalized font, meaning that this image of the mother and the father is a heated argument or a heated conversation taking place. All right. So when she's pointing with her thumb towards herself, she is now obviously depicting the visual clue that you are looking at. All right. And then that is emphasizing that she is Connie Duncan. Then the vocab, look at on the dot. That is showing us that at that precise moment, she expected a response. The word wrath. So the diction, the choice of words being used here is to showcase her wrath or anger towards her son not listening to her. Right? Very great anger, the word wrath. That's what it means there. Then look at the next frame, frame 3. Well, he has exactly 4 seconds left. And the 4 seconds left, you can see it's a larger font there than the previous frames, and it's emphasizing the time that he has in which to respond. Also the fact that her body language is showing that her hand is far drawn out and she's holding the cell phone in her hand, showcasing that she's looking straight at that cell phone, expecting him to respond within those 4 seconds. Right. Then look at the following aspects. Actions. What is happening in the cartoon? That would give us an understanding of a very basic level of understanding. Then, how is the action being portrayed? Now you're going to look for the visuals. You're going to look for the verbal text that's there to showcase what's being happened. All right? The words that are being used will then be delved into for further meaning. That is bringing that higher order of understanding. Then when you're looking at the characters, you're asking yourself, what emotions is he or she communicating through the facial expressions? What actions or emotions are communicated through the body language of the characters? What does that body language suggest about the relationship between the characters? So for example, in that frame where the mom and dad are communicating with each other, are they syncing in terms of smiling and being jovial with each other, or are they actually now being furious with each other because they can see that their parenting skill is not actually working when it came to disciplining their son. All right, so that relationship understanding must come through there when looking at the characters. Then when looking at the language, all right, what words have been used? So the diction will play a part here. The punctuation mark, when they're using the question mark and the exclamation mark next to each other, why was that used? How did that showcase the anger or the frustration or the upset mood that the mother was experiencing? Then we're looking at the other two aspects of setting versus stereotypes and symbols. Now, the setting is obviously the context of where this text is taking place, okay? This thing. What is a particular social context that is being showcased as well? The stereotypes or the symbols. Has the cartoonist made use of stereotypes? And has the cartoonist used any symbols to represent something else? All right? That is important. So take note of that. Then in terms of further recapping the cartoon analysis, I said to you to take note of certain information. Look at the setting. Where is the scene taking place? Is it a particular location that is being showcased? A specific place that I need to take note of? Because that is clues that is relevant for understanding. Is it in a hospital setup? Is it in a restaurant setup? Is it in a room in a house? That kind of thing is very important. Look at the figure in terms of figuring out the purpose that this cartoon is all about. Is it meant to make me laugh or to think about something critically or think seriously about a concept or to do both? What am I understanding when I'm looking at the facial features of this particular character? Is he showcasing a happy instance or a negative instance? Be specific when you're dealing with that. We're looking at the body language like I showed you just now. Look at the movement of the characters in terms of their body language. Look at their posture. Look at the gestures they are making use of. The signals, the signs, all of the hand movements that they're using in the particular frames. Revise your concepts like your irony, your sarcasm, your satire, all the figures of speech that is relevant, okay? Paradox, oxymoron, all of those things can come through when we are testing the cartoon strip. Also look at if there is a mark allocation of 3 marks. Have you given us a comment that is showcasing why that particular image or words being used is appropriate or not? Okay, so that's important for you when you're dealing with the cartoon analysis. And then the final question of the paper is the textual editing one, question 5. All right, please grade 12s, go back and look at the past 3 years of papers as a task that has to be done. All right, and then if you're going to go to the 2 years prior to the last 3 years, then that's also fine if you're having the time to do that. But the last 3 years showcases the changes that have happened in the language paper. So you will note, for example, in question 3 and 4, there will be language concepts being tested over and above the actual concepts that we're looking at for cartoons versus adverts. Then in terms of textual editing now, it's the pure language concepts and structures that you need to go over and know how they are used in sentences for us to gauge meaning or understanding. So when looking at parts of speech, can you identify the difference between the noun, the adjective, the adverb, the adverbial clause, for example? Can you see how they convert from one to the other in the text? All right. Then, can you focus on the concord error in a particular sentence? Do you know that if there's a singular subject, there must be the singular verb and vice versa? Okay, we can't mix that up because then the sentence will not be sounding grammatically correct. Can you then notice that there will be the direct speech? In other words, as if that conversation is happening right now. And how do you take that and report that information, the reported speech? Because then there you will be dealing with tenses as well. Also deal with sentences, simple, complex, compound sentences, okay? The tenses, the past, the present, the future tense would be also something to look at. Ambiguity, okay? Can you notice the ambiguity in what is being said in particular statements? Malapropism. Then can you see tautology difference versus redundancy? Now, when you are tested on redundancy, for example, remember to remove the redundant part for the sentence, okay? Don't put them both in there and then say, they kind of make sense. No, there's obviously something that needs to be taken out of the sentence for us to still gauge meaning. Active versus passive voice. You need to know about the subject, object, and how they are affected in the various sentences, the changes from where they move in terms of the structure of the sentences. All right, you're looking at purpose or function of punctuation marks. Why would I use an apostrophe and not a colon? Why would I use the hash and not the dash? The hash and not the dash. No, all right? Why would I use the hyphen and not the dash? That is obviously something that you need to take note of. You're also going to look at, can I see a comma splice error, for example? These are things you've learned over the last 5-6 years of your schooling career. Can you notice also the difference between the phrase and the clause? Remember, one will stand alone and still make sense, whereas the other one would need something or some part of the sentence to make sense, all right? Sentence structure. Can you notice what is missing in the sentences that are affecting or not giving us effective meaning? So here's a comparison from the 2018 paper all the way to 2022. If you go through this diagram, grade 12s, you would be seeing the kind of concepts that you have to be familiar with. We don't know what's going to come out in the question 5 in terms of the language structures. And therefore, you need to be aware that you cover all of these aspects. It does seem like it's a lot. But if you start from day 1 and take 5 aspects and master that 5 aspects and move to the next one and the next 5 and the next 3, by the end of term 1, term 2, you would have mastered all of the techniques that need to be understood with the language structures. All right. Then 2023 versus 2024, notice the hyphen, the synonym, the pronoun, the punctuation mark, redundancy, homophone, conjunction usage, verbs. All right, that obviously has been a little bit more reduced in its structure as opposed to the 2023. Now, remember, we usually say it's 1 mark each, but sometimes you would get a 2-mark question, and the 2-mark question would say to you, you have to make sure that all aspects have been included or looked at in that response, all right? So go over the last 3 years papers of the NSC exams to get all the concepts understood in those 3 years and then move to the other 2 years prior to that. Okay, and then grade 12s, that is the end of our looking at paper 1 in terms of prepping for the control test, and we would again look at this in depth furthermore when we come to the June exams and the prelims. But for now, go back, revise these concepts, ensure you are able to handle any kind of questions that is testing those aspects I spoke about this afternoon, and you will then be ready to tackle that paper or that test in March. All right, I want to thank you so much for joining me for this lesson, and I hope that you'll take the time to go back and familiarize yourself with these concepts, master the skills so that you can get the maximum mark in the control test and in your paper 1 going forward. All the best for the week that is in front of you. Do your best, tackle the concepts, revise, remediate if you need to, learn what you need to learn in this particular week, and then add that on to your base for your revision purposes going forward. Thank you, grade 12s. Take care of your health, take care of your environment around you, and make sure that it's conducive for studying and learning that you need to ensure it's done for this year. I'll catch you next week for another lesson in English Home Language. And please, until then, be safe and take care.